Thanks for that introduction, and Grant, your testimony there, it's certainly nothing to be sneezed at. If you'd like to open up your Bibles, actually I've got a story to tell first and I might need my glasses to read. Okay, so Monday the 26th of December last year, about 12 p.m, 8 sailors headed out of Sydney Harbour on a 12-metre boat called the Huntress. It was a 77th Sydney to Hobart yacht race, and for the first 36 hours, they called it champagne sailing conditions. There were strong northerly winds and it was pushing them straight down the east coast of Australia, and they're sitting on roughly about 20 knots, which is just under 40 kilometres an hour, having a great time. Very early, Wednesday the 28th, the conditions turned to gale forced and their champagne sailing became very trying and very tough conditions for them. So it's the complete darkness. They've pulled down the two front sails, the spinnaker and the head sail. So these guys, they weren't out to win the race really. They were just out to actually make it all the way to Hobart for their first time competing in this race. And they were just in survival mode in the conditions that they were in with the sea. 7 a.m. in the morning, they collided with a sunfish, they believe, that broke the rudder off the boat. And so the sun was up at the time, and someone on the back of the boat actually got a photo of the rudder floating on a wave behind them. They lost control of the boat and floundered in the water for the next hour, taking down the mainsail and still having waves crashing over the side of the boat and having a lot of problems there. They decided they would call the police rescue crafts, and they were 80 nautical miles east of Flinders Island. So by midday, the police rescue craft had come out to them, and the 8 guys abandoned ship. Actually, it was 1 female and 7 guys. They abandoned ship and immediately went to Flinders Island and was planning a recovery of their boat. They just left it floating in the sea. Saturday the 31st of December, while everyone else was thinking about New Year's Eve, the batteries had now gone flat on this boat, so the navigation lights had stopped shining, and the AIS system, which is an automatic identification system that on a computer or your phones and things, you can actually locate exactly where the boat was floating around, that dropped out as well, so they had no idea where their boat was. The strong northerly winds had turned into some strong southerly winds, so it made rescuing the craft and towing it back pretty much impossible till the sea conditions settled down. And on Thursday the 5th of January, after nobody knew where the boat was, it was found run ashore on a beach called Christmas Beach on Cape Barren Island by the local islanders there. The yacht has since been dragged off the beach and run into northern Tasmania for some repairs. And why am I telling you this story? Well, quite possibly, someone in those trying conditions called out to God and said, maybe, God, could you help us get out of this situation alive? I don't know that for a fact. It probably hasn't got much to do with any scriptures at all, but it's a little bit like the bloke that goes out for his last minute Christmas shopping just before Christmas, and he was driving up and down the shopping centre trying to find a car park, and he calls out to God, could you find me a car park? I'll change my ways if you just find me a car park. And he turns the corner and there's this nice big opening car park available to him. He says, it's all right, God, I found one myself. But if we now open our Bibles to Acts 27. Is there another light on for here somewhere? That's made all the difference, thank you. Okay, so Acts 27, and it's a similar sort of a story. Oh, wow, that seems better. In the beginning of, it's nearing winter, should we say, in 60 AD, and Paul has been sort of wrongly accused and been sent to Rome to be tried by Caesar, and he's put under the guard of a Julius, and he's now put on a Egyptian grain ship and is going to be taken to Rome. Now it's late in the year, and these particular boats, unlike the boats that are racing around today, were very unmanoeuvrable. So we've got this grain ship that's got 276 people on board, so it's a massive boat. And if anyone's seen Ben-Hur on TV or Viking movies or something like that, it's just a very long boat with a pointy bow and a pointy stern. Pretty much a flat deck, not a lot of freeboard, and it's obviously going to be big enough to put 276 people on, and it has a very low keel that runs along the middle, and it doesn't give the boat any opportunity but to go about 90 degrees to the wind direction or running downwind. So if we start reading here in Acts 27 in about verse 7, and we read here, and when we had sailed slowly many days and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmone. Now, it's talking there that they weren't able to actually go the direction they wanted to go, so they've had to go a slightly different direction. The Egyptians that carted the grain to Rome, they would use the trade winds around the Mediterranean, and if the winds weren't favourable, if they weren't perhaps travelling downwind, they would just anchor or tie up the boat until the winds were favourable to give them the direction they wanted to go. And it's saying there that they couldn't even go the direction they wanted to go, so they just changed course slightly and run a slightly different direction. Even the times of Captain Cook, so that's sort of like 1700s, a boat would pretty much only go about 90 degrees to the wind. So if I'm trying to get towards you and the wind's coming straight at me, the best I can do is go backwards and forwards along the stage and actually not make any headway. So it does make it quite difficult if the wind isn't going the right direction, or if the wind drops out. These particular boats, they probably had a big rowboat that they would drop into the water, and they could pull the boat around with a couple of oarsmen to manoeuvre it, and they would have a big mainsail in the middle of the boat, possibly a sail at the front, and just pretty much a rudder dragging in the water behind it to give it any sort of direction that it wanted to go. But it was pretty much the sea conditions that determined where it went, unless they wanted to start towing it with their rowboat. If we move on to verse 9, and now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. Now, we remember here, Paul's a prisoner at the time, but he's obviously been given a fair bit of latitude, but he's been given freedom to speak his word, and he says in verse 10, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be hurt with much damage, not only the lading of the ship, but also our lives. So Paul sort of, whether he's had a vision already, but he's a bit nervous about going out at this time of year. Now, it was quite known that late in the year or early into winter, as they said, it was dangerous to go out sailing, that the the Egyptian sailors would make a dash to try and get good money for their grain. So this boat would have been full of grain all underneath, and the 276 people would have been huddled on deck with whatever. There was no cabins, no portholes, no sort of buffet lunches and breakfasts. It was, you took everything that you could to survive and sat on the deck huddled in your blanket or huddling each other, and just used a rug for a bit of protection, something like that. If we go to verse 13, and now when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence they sailed close by Crete. So they had their opportunity of champagne sailing, but in verse 14, and not long after there arose against it a tempest wind called Euroclydon. Now the word Euroclydon seems to mean gale force winds, so their sailing conditions have gone from champagne to very trying or tough, and it's very common through the Adriatic Sea and through that part of the world there to get these sort of northeasterly winds that come off the North Pole, and they are freezing, and people die in the mountains just from these blizzard conditions. But out in the ocean, the Adriatic Sea, the Mediterranean, the waves are starting to pick up. It's quite rough and cold and windy and wet out for these 276 people sitting on deck of this boat. Verse 14, verse 15, and when the ship was caught, they could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive, and running under a certain island which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat, which, when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, stroke sail, and so were driven. So, as I said, they could only do 90 degrees to the wind. If the wind's blowing this direction, the waves are coming this direction, the boat's side on to the wind. So they're rocking backwards and forwards. The people that are huddled up over this side have slipped over to that side, and vice versa, backwards and forwards as they're rocking and rolling in the ocean waves there. So the captains decided we just turn the boat around and run straight downwind. They've dropped some sails, the main sail, to slow the boat down, and worried about the ship actually breaking to pieces, they then run ropes right around it and tie them off to try and hold the boat together. So if you'd paid for that ride, I think you'd be starting to think you've paid too early. Well, they say don't pay the ferryman till he gets you to the other side. And they're talking about the quicksands along North Africa, that they're figuring the winds are blowing that strong, they're going to just run into the top of Africa and be stuck out on these quicksand or sort of just plains, mud plateaus and things across the top of the country there. And in verse, where are we going? We keep going. And when they had exceedingly tossed with the tempest in verse 18, the next day they lightened the ship. So they're now worried that not only is everyone's goods and chattels banging around, and they've just started throwing stuff overboard to try and get a bit higher freeboard, to try and keep them a little bit drier, and just to try and keep the boat afloat. And 19, on the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars for many days appeared, and no small tempest lay upon us, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. So they've now spent plenty of days. They're not even seeing the day or the night, the difference. It's just an absolute storm. They're throwing everything off they could. They'd be just huddling each other, and you can imagine a few people very likely seasick. This is days now, and I go on the Kangaroo Island ferry, and that's only a 45-minute trip, and I've seen plenty of people not last that time. So certainly days. There's going to be plenty of people not feeling too well. If we go on to verse 24, and Paul's now he's been spoken to by an angel, and he's quite happy to actually share this experience with the rest of the people on board. And he's saying in verse 24, "Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall by even as it was told me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. And when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down the Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to a country." So, however they did that, they sounded and found the depth was getting shallower and shallower, and they figured that they, according to Paul, were going to be cast upon an island. So they were quite prepared then that perhaps they had found land, not knowing whereabouts it was. In verse 29, "And fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day." So again, the experience of the seamen there, if they throw the anchors out of the rear of the boat and waited for the daytime, in the morning they have an opportunity, if the boat's hanging from the stern, to pull up the sails and sail away, where if they pulled the anchors out from the front of the boat, they would pretty much just be stuck there unless they put down their tender and towed the boat around another direction, because they need to turn a full 90 degrees before they're even able to start sailing again. So they've anchored it from the rear, they've waited for daylight, and they're sort of giving thanks that they're still alive, I'm sure. In verse 33 now, actually, I googled it, and in the 1960s, some divers actually found in the Bay of Malta, they found these 4 anchors that they believe were off of this ship, just to give sort of credibility that this story did actually happen. And they've been, I think, probably taken into the Vatican City, I would imagine, but where all the other treasures might go. In verse 33, "And while the day was coming up, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, This day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not a hair fall from your head on any of you." And when he had thus spoken, he took the bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all, and when they broke it, they began to eat. And they were all of good cheer, and they took some meat. So whether they were particularly fasting or whether they were just completely seasick for 14 days, and if we look at 14 in Bible numerics number, it's a number that represents deliverance or salvation. So the 14 was sort of critical of their deliverance here in this situation. And they then had the meat to give themselves strength as they were preparing to jump ship. And if we read in verse 40, "And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosened the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made towards shore. And falling into the place where the 2 seas meet, they ran the ship aground. And the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinderer was broken up with the violence of the waves." Now we know there that they basically jumped. The ones that could swim swam to shore, and the ones that couldn't swim grabbed a bit of planks off the boat and floated to shore. But either way, the whole 276 rolled up in Malta and were able to praise the Lord for their deliverance and their salvation. And it didn't stop there, as they didn't have a boat to sail away with straight away, so they did have to spend the next 3 months of winter on Malta, where Paul particularly got to preach the gospel. And if we read in chapter 28, in verse 8, "And it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of the fever." Now he was the chief of the island's father. And Paul entered in and prayed and laid hands on him and healed him. So when this was done, others also which had diseases on the island came and were healed. Now, we know that the gospel went out in Malta, and even to this day they have a public holiday to commemorate the the shipwreck of when Paul ran ashore there. So that's sort of 1960 years or whatever, to remember this actual event happening, where Christianity and the gospel was spread into the town of Malta, or the country of Malta. If we go, no, don't even turn there, but in Psalm 119, verse 105 says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path." And it got me thinking that obviously Paul hadn't planned to do this, but the Lord sent him in this direction, and it was just an opportunity to preach the gospel to people that hadn't heard it. And particularly in the last 2 weeks, the testimonies from, if you remember, Reese or Mooney from last week, they both said in their testimonies that that doors are opened for them and sent them in a direction, and other doors closed. And it wasn't particularly the direction that they thought they wanted to go or chose to go, but they could see that the Lord was giving them a direction and a path to travel on. If we go to Acts 9. And it just talks about particularly Paul, and when he first, I'll just read it, that's probably the easiest. Acts 9 verse 3. And as he journeyed, this is Saul, he came near Damascus, and suddenly there shined around him a light from heaven, and he fell to the earth and heard a voice saying unto him, "Saul, Saul, why persecute thou me?" And he said, "Who art thou, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am Jesus, whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks." And that term, kick against the pricks, is an unusual expression, but it really came to light. I used to work with racehorses, and the racehorses can be pretty stubborn, particularly if you try and get them into starting gates when they don't want to go in there, or into a horse float or something like that, and you sort of like pull on the reins as hard as you like, or give them a bit of a jab in the ribs or something like that. But if they don't want to go, they just plant their feet, and you cannot hinge them forward. And this old farmer guy, he gives me this loop of rope that you just hook over the back of the horse, and it has a bit that you come forward, and apologise to any animal liberationists out there, but he had woven some barbed wire through it, so that as I gave the rope a bit of a pull, it would give the horses a little bit of a prick in the back, and they would dance forward and go straight into the horse float or straight into the starting gates. And you see the horse, you can see on the expression on their face when they go to pull back, they go, "Whoa, that was a bit," and start moving forward. And I never had such an easy time loading up the starting gates for races with this particular rope that this guy gave me, but it just sums up kicking against the pricks. If you're pushing backwards against something and it's giving you a little bit of a prick or a jab, you're going to go against it. So you're going to go the other way. And if the Lord wants you to go a different direction, He's going to give you that opportunity to go against it and get a bit of a prick, or you go forward the way He wants you to go, and it'll be smooth sailing, or champagne sailing was the term. If we go to, wow, is that time right, or must be, okay, Esther 4. I'll try and speed things up a little bit. Okay, Esther, you probably really need to read the story to get the gist of it, but there's one verse here, Esther 4 verse 14, and we know Esther has been put in a position where she's able to be in a very powerful position, and her uncle says to her, "For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?" Just the The context, if you want to read the story, but I think we've all been given that opportunity to where we find ourselves in a situation that who knows if this isn't the time the Lord has brought us to the Lord to use what we've got to hand it on to somebody else, to offer the same gifts that we've received, the same salvation message onto somebody else. The Lord's plan and purpose will prevail, and whether we're a part of it or we're not a part of it. And who knows if it's not the time now for us to be a part of it. Romans 10. Verse 13. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. How then shall they call upon him whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe on him whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings and good things. We read all the four gospels in the New Testament, and they all finish up with the commission to go out and preach the gospel with signs, wonders and miracles, and it's up to us to go out and do that, to be the voice piece for the Lord. The boat, pretty much through the Bible, the boat, particularly in the New Testament, represents the safety of the church. And we can look in Matthew 14, but don't bother going there, about how the disciples are in the boat. They're in the safety of the boat, and Jesus comes walking out on a tempest water, and Peter comes out and he says, Lord, bid me to come and walk on the water. And Jesus says, come, and he walks on the water. The opportunity, as we're saying, we're now crashing a boat into Aldinga, and we're going out to spread the gospel in that area. The opportunity is to step out of the church and walk on water. While we've got our eyes on the Lord, we'll be able to perform all sorts of miracles. And so it's up to us to use that safety of the church, but also get out and invite other people into it. And just as I'll sort of run it up and finish up, but the opportunity's coming up with a convention this year, and it's only sort of 5 months away, where we perhaps are asking everyone just to dig that little bit deeper into their own walk in the Lord, what they can do. We're going to have, I think I heard something like 100 PNG brothers and sisters that are going to need to be housed. We've got heaps of outreaching, heaps of opportunities to step out of our comfort zone and just be a part of the fellowship. We say that we're a revival fellowship, and we've got the fellowship really down pat, but it's the revival that we really want to see, and the opportunity to house some PNG saints. If you've ever been to PNG, the hospitality that these guys show us when they have very little themselves is second to none. And I've even talked with people that they've now had lifelong friends from people that they've actually billeted in their own house. So perhaps that's something to think about in the next few months, that there's opportunities there to open up your house to share that, enjoy some fellowship, meet some new people worldwide that you wouldn't otherwise meet, and really understand that we are a worldwide fellowship that's preaching the gospel and bringing it all over the world. I'll leave it there. Amen.